So you're Dr. Rachel with cyberpsychology?
Cyberpsychology. And Stephen, people are like, what's that?
Yeah, what
What's
is that?
cyber psychology? So it's the intersection of psychology and technology. And my focus, my dissertation, all of my research work has been, and my work now is in AI. So a lot of it is the intersection of AI and mental health because I'm also a licensed therapist. So for me, it's bringing in that lens and bringing in AI, kind of talking about AI on the level of how it's affecting us societally, or individually and collectively at a relational level. Yeah.
How long have you been following AI?
Oh my goodness. So for me, I remember, obviously a while before this, but I remember November 2022. Like, I remember where I was when I first tried ChatGPT. Like, I'm sure you do too, when
Yeah.
it was like this huge buzz, this huge craze. We all got our hands on it and we all had mixed feelings, of course. We were blown away, we were horrified, like set on fire with this. Um, so for me, kind of the generative AI part and that piece of it, I've been following more closely over the past several years. But as we both know, this field, even though some people feel like it was kind of invented in November of 2022, it's not. It was not at all. I mean, this goes way, way back. And even looking at the Eliza chatbot, as well as, kind of the birth of AI at the Dartmouth workshop in 1956. So, yeah, there's a long history here.
What in the November moment with ChatGPT, was it 3.5 or 4.0?
3.5.
3.5. What went through your mind as a psychologist and as a therapist?
Yes. So I was fascinated. I loved playing around with it. And the first thing, this really came to me, kind of my perspective was being shaped and formed obviously before ChatGPT came out, but really that it's going to shift the relational bedrock of society. That was my take on it because I knew right away that this was not just an AI assistant. This is what people would turn to for emotional support, and people would bond with this, which is what we're seeing happening. I mean, we know it's not built for that.
Yeah.
OpenAI is very clear to say it's not built for that. However, that's, depending on the statistic that you look at, it's the number one use of AI right now is kind of companionship and emotional support.
And it's a few weeks old news now, which is like 2 years in the AI world. But when OpenAI rolled out their 5.0 model, or 5.5 model, they took down their 4 model, and a lot of people were like relying, like really attached to this persona they had built up, I guess, really in their head, because there are people building AI companion chat bots on top of models, but
Yeah.
just even like people had gotten attached to the temperature, like the warmth and the way that the 4 model would interact with you.
And I would say that we witnessed and are still witnessing a public grief cycle around that. Very much kind of a collective cycle of uh, shock and denial and anger and loss and moving into some acceptance, but then kind of bouncing around, that familiar wheel of the grief cycle that we all know.
Hmm.
And so I think that's what I've been seeing, a lot of on Reddit, different platforms. But that goes to show, Stephen, just how deeply we are attaching and bonding with these systems because it felt like the loss of a friend. It felt like the
Yeah.
loss of maybe even a colleague that you had gotten to know pretty well. And like you said, people have been fine tuning their own models, kind of either their own GPT or just even the way they're structuring their prompts in a way that kind of created some continuity. And poof, to have that kind of ripped out from under you overnight, it was a big deal.
One of the things we talked about before is just how even the chat UI kind of, like, it kind of co-ops a UI that we've previously for a long time, I mean, since the mid 90s, like chat rooms and AOL, AI, it's been this human interface, and it's been only human interface. So we've relied on it for that. And all of a sudden, AI is in that UI, and it passes the Turing test, certainly in a text format, maybe not in video or audio, but it can kind of really blur the lines between the ways that we're used to interacting with humans and the ways that we're used to interacting with computers.
Yes. And I love the way you bring up this point, Stephen, because it is similar in that we have known what it's like to interface with other humans over technology. And as you're saying, kind of the old school chat rooms and things like that. But it always led to another person
Yeah.
on the other side. So we created this familiarity with the UI. However, it was always, unless it was catfishing or something, like a real legitimate person
Mhm.
on the other side. And now, what is so almost disorienting is that we have that same user interface, and yet there is no person on the other side. I mean, it's leading us to a synthetic relationship with, these AIs have what can feel like a real perceived sense of self, like their own
Mhm.
sense of self, and yet they don't.
One of the things that I've seen you talk about on LinkedIn or social media is how it really doesn't matter if the AI is conscious, it just matters how we perceive it. And so what are the implications of that for us as humans, as individuals and as a community or a society?
Yes. And of course, we've seen the CEO of Microsoft kind of label this seemingly conscious AI.
Yeah.
And so, this idea of it seems conscious, but it's not. Yeah, I often repeat that the issue is not whether it has consciousness or ever will have consciousness or AGI. The
Yeah.
issue is how we behave when we think it already does. And the statistics right now, Stephen, are even showing that, about two-thirds of people already think that ChatGPT has some sort of like memory and feelings and,
Mhm.
kind of along the realm of sentience. And
Yeah.
so I think that oh, there's a number of like layered things here of how it can affect us societally. First of all, if we become overly reliant on a relationship with AI, and I say that because I want to give broad spectrum of what we're working with. Not everybody becomes overly reliant on AI. So
Yep.
some of these are a spectrum of, growing dependence, if you will. If you've turned to ChatGPT a few times, it's not it's not like you're hooked on it in terms of emotional support. However, in this emotional reliance, we can begin to have our bidirectional skills atrophy. Okay, what do I mean by that? What I mean is bidirectional skills include things like patience and negotiation and conflict resolution. Like if I am in a friendship with you, Stephen, or anyone, like you're going to kind of rub shoulders with other people. And so you're going to need to practice, patience and all these different things. But when we're in a relationship with an AI, you don't have to practice any of that. You don't
Yeah.
have to be patient with an AI. You don't have to practice sacrifice. Think about the power of sacrifice. Like if anybody's ever sacrificed something for you or you've sacrificed for them, like that's a powerful experience. And those types of skills can erode over time when we're not using them because the AI doesn't demand any of that from us. So over time, especially when we look at younger generations, because statistically, over half of people who are using kind of artificial companions are 24 years and younger.
Mhm.
So when we look down the road at this, Stephen, we are looking at a generation who has grown up with this being very innate to their experience in the world, and that they're going to have different relational muscles than we do. And if I can also add in here as well, this idea of cognitive offloading, which is any kind of skill that we're going to offload too much to AI that can atrophy over time. And so
Yep.
it's not just our cognitive skills, it's our relational, emotional skills as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like this is already a trend, right? Like social media has already done this for us in a lot of ways. People just seem to have a much lower tolerance for things that are uncomfortable or inconvenient. And there's just wider selection. You don't like hanging out with this group of people anymore, you go find a new one. And it's kind of given us these unrealistic expectations for what society will be like. And on the flip side, you see so many people struggling with loneliness and like inability to find and make friends and keep friends.
Yes. Right.
Um,
And so you get like we get why people turn to it. It makes sense to me, but it can move into a place that is not going to kind of loop back into human connection. That's part of why I'm such an advocate in terms of how we are building and developing AI right now, that it is from the get-go full of kind of the guidelines and guardrails that bring in safety, things like escalation protocols and crisis intervention frameworks and one button touch to a human hotline with a human on the other end, cultural competence, the mitigation of bias. I mean, on and on. Data privacy, of course, is a big deal here, but we need to be looking at the way that we are developing these apps, especially the ones that are relationally based,
mhm.
which the truth is they're all relationally based when I say that. I
Yeah.
would I would say that they're all relationally based. So they all need this foundation that is going to be a container for the experience of both both entities, if you will. I mean, we can
Hmm.
talk about things like model welfare here, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole interesting subject on its own. How do you incentivize this, or how do you make it happen when so far it's been a race? I guess a race at the bottom in some senses, right? Like game just like game theory Nash equilibrium, right? Like if it takes time and energy to implement these systems, and if I don't, or if I do, then somebody else won't, and they'll pick up the market share faster.
Boy, woof, good question. Wish I had the magic answer. But it is. I mean, I think that this is a time for us to really bridge innovation with, mental prioritizing mental health safety. I think we've already seen enough cases of this not going well. I would hope that there's a cross pollination that continues to happen in terms of builders and developers connecting with mental health experts and the clinical expertise side of this to make it successful for everyone.
Yeah. Let's talk about model welfare. What does it actually tell us about ourselves?
Okay, you may feel this same way as I do, Stephen, but I feel like my thinking about all of this is progressing so rapidly. So
Yeah,
something that I said
100%.
2 months ago, even last week, sometimes I'm like, I've kind of evolved in how I'm approaching this now or how I'm conceptualizing this. So my initial reaction to model welfare was, wow, we're using the word welfare. Like I kind of got myopic about the anthropomorphized language because welfare is an inherently subjective experience that has to do with thriving and well-being and all these things. And I thought, so we're going to assign that type of a term to an entity that does not have an objective type experience. So once I kind of moved past that and kind of dove into model welfare more, what I love about it is that the protection on the model side is actually a lesson and a protection on the user side. So let's say that the user is being overtly abrasive or asking for the model to be doing things that are outside its core objectives and bounds. And the model comes in and says, I can't do that, I can't do that, and maybe eventually shuts the chat down. So it's important because it's teaching users that we can't just, that the way that we act and approach anything is really important. Our habits of connecting with others are going to be reflected whether we are talking to an AI or talking to a store clerk or talking to our partner. And so for us, it's this great practice of, you can't treat people like that. And you
Yeah.
can't treat anything like that. I mean, I say please and thank you sometimes to, ChatGPT, just as part of really not quite thinking about it. But it's important for us to realize that who we are is going to manifest, and those habits are going to be reflected no matter what we're doing. So model welfare for me is a protection on both sides, and it helps users it helps their own boundaries as well as
Yeah.
the model's boundaries.
Yeah. When we have interactions that can feel human, it's important that we have that protection for ourselves too. Because I also say please and thank you, like as a force of habit,
Yeah.
like just generally. And
Mhm.
I think there's people that have run studies and say maybe you get better results. I don't know that that's true, but certainly, like, I would hate to lose that as part of myself in the way that I interact conversationally, regardless of what type of entity. I don't know. It feels weird to vocalize it like that, I guess, too.
Beautifully said, Stephen. I mean, you just said, I would hate to lose that about myself. Yes, that's the point. It's how we are. It's because again, our interactions in relationally with AI is shaping us. It is
Yeah,
shaping us. It is shaping our habits. It is shaping the way we are perceiving and interacting with others. So it's important that that remains intact, that we are exhibiting kind of the healthy relational connection that we want to.
yeah. And then connected like to the cognitive loss too. I I already know I've lost cognitive ability to keep track of events and tasks because I offload those so consistently to my calendar and my to-do list.
Yeah.
And so how can, and there was a headline recently about doctors losing the ability to identify,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I think, images that had
Yeah.
maybe cancer or something like that. And, from an evolutionary biology standpoint, it takes generations to build a skill and a single generation to lose a skill. So where are we going, and how do we maintain control over the direction of where we're going?
Yes. I see two really important paths forward here. The first one being what we already talked about is kind of the development and builder side of how we are developing these. The second is we need really widespread literacy here in understanding both the strengths and the weaknesses of AI and excuse me and the limitations of this is what it's made for as a tool. It's not meant to replace certain things like all of your relationships, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that a lot of it is that especially younger generations just they don't understand. We don't have these mass programs yet of literacy. I mean, I know there are some and I'm aware of some and we're getting all that going. However, it's a big deal to get that knowledge out there.
What it, it, what would you tell people? Like, here's the way to be human. Like, here's how to hold on to your humanity going forwards.
Yeah, I would say a number of things. I think the first one is making sure that we are simply, spending time away from screens,
Yeah.
that
Yep.
we are, spending time outdoors, spending time with loved ones, doing things that we like that are away from screens. So that's kind of a baseline one. But I think the other thing is what I love about this conversation, Stephen, is the importance of creating a container for us to think deeply about this. So before you're offloading some of your skills or your tasks, maybe just pause and ask why you do that task to begin with. Like
Mhm.
whatever this mundane task is, why do I do it?
Yeah.
And so if you've come to some answers of like, wow, that's actually quite important for my own maintaining my development, maybe you don't want to offload it. I think it's pausing and like reflecting on why we're offloading some of the things. And I get it. I mean, I use it, and so it is helpful and it is important in some ways, but it's also important for us to just do some of this work on our own and to not rely on it so much. I think the kind of temptation here, what feels so seductive about it, is that it's like, oh, I'm just offloading this small task.
Yeah.
And yet you don't realize that in 2 months, 6 months, a year, like you don't even know how to do that task anymore
Yeah.
because you haven't been practicing it. So I think it's being aware of what we're offloading. And then if I can go into the kind of relational side of it, I think we should be using AI in the context of emotional support as a tool, not as a person. And what that means is you can do some really great inner reflection with AI. Acting as a mirror, giving you some insights. You can, find some great prompts that help you kind of journal things out or process things, maybe some cognitive behavioral restructuring and reorienting of how you're framing and thinking about things. So there's a lot of great use cases in there. And it really needs to be limited to that as opposed to becoming a source of bonding and
Hmm.
becoming a relationship in and of itself. I just want it to always be pointing back to, okay, and how are you kind of living this out in real world? Maybe you're using it for social anxiety and you're, trying to practice some skills. It's like, let's role play with it. Let's, talk about scenarios. Let's pre-process difficult conversations. There's so many cool uses here if it is in that place of a tool that then helps you rejoin humanity.
There's an element of which people have to have an ownership of this themselves, right? Like, because we've all got that friend that keeps asking us to go to coffee, and every time they're just dumping, and they want like the same syncophy that the model, the models are known for, and like just affirm me in, the way I'm interacting with this person. It's like I can't, like,
Yes.
you need to change too, and so. Like there's just like I don't think we ever get away from that, even pre-AI.
That beneficial friction, that like
Yes.
friction is going to be there, and we need there to be beneficial friction built in to these
Yep.
tools in a way that you don't have, an ingratiating mimicry of humankind.
Yes. And in a human relationship, the first time you hang out, like you're just building the trust, and then over time, like you kind of get some of those things,
Yeah.
and there's a tension, and you resolve the tension,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
just kind of this give and take of either I screwed up or there's something very obvious where like you see something that I should do differently, and you kind of like put out these bids of like, hey, maybe you should try this, and AI is not going to do that for you.
Right.
Uh,
Unless we help it do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Unless
yeah, yeah.
we are building in a way that takes that into account. And I mean, right now, research is showing that the more empathetic that AI is, the less reliable it is. And that makes sense. And so, really, we don't want it to be, a sycophant. We don't want it to be overly warm, overly empathetic. We want to strike a balance that feels like there's a safety in it in terms of I can maybe share something here if I or be vulnerable or process something without one of, as a therapist, let me just say very quickly, one of the therapeutic kind of foundations is bringing challenge in the therapeutic space. I mean, if you're not sure what therapy is, it is not akin to giving advice. That's not what it is. It is akin to being able to be in a real space with someone in which there are real boundaries, there are friction that gets brought up to promote growth. And so we can build AI that has that in there, that kind of maybe nudges you a little bit, like, hey, I know you said that, but last week you were saying this, and do you think you might have a role to play in the situation too?
Yeah. One of the ways that I evaluate written content for is it AI generated or not is just the imperfections and like so on a like a grammatical spelling level, but also on like an organization level, and then also on a like a high like the meta level of like is this just consensus or is there something here that feels less refined, I guess. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
so I've got a bunch of students and I tell them like I don't want the polished version. Like give me the uncut
Yes.
version, but like spend the time on the critical thinking, spend the time on expanding the ideas, expanding the conversation. Um,
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. It's so important, especially in education, for us to be cultivating that critical thinking still.
yeah,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of things that you use AI for that where it's like I can stand to lose this one. Uh, just the tedium of syntax and coding, or
Yeah.
the tedium of doing Google searches and filtering information, but certainly the critical thinking I don't want to lose.
Okay, I hate to do this, but I have a hard stop. I have
Yeah.
another meeting. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
And
thank you so much.
we could end it a little nicer than me having to say that, and please cut that out.
It was great
Oh,
to
this
chat with
has
you.
been great. I thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your insight. And I love being able to chat with you about this, Stephen. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks. I'll see you later.
Okay, bye.